Right, okay, we'll start then, as it's just after 5 o'clock. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this virtual meeting of the Scrutiny Budget and Performance Panel. For those who still don't know me, I'm Councillor David Howarth and I am the chair of the panel. Please note this is an audio and video meeting. It's being recorded and the stream will also be live on YouTube. The web address for this is displayed on the council's website. Members are asked to keep their microphone on mute and only unmute when they wish to speak. The cabinet member and officers will present the report and I'll then invite panel members to ask any questions. If any panel members wish to speak, you should unmute your microphone and say your name or use the raise your hand feature. I will then invite you in order. If the technology fails, then I will adjourn the meeting for several minutes and try to resolve the issue, or if this is not possible, a new date and time will be organised. So could I please ask all members to confirm they can see, hear and speak before the meeting begins, which in this case is Councillor Colin Coulson. Councillor Coulson, yes. Can you see and hear us? Yes, yep. Thank you. The officers this evening are Darren Cranshaw, who is the Assistant Director of Scrutiny and Democratic Services, Coral Asprey, Democratic and Member Services Officer, and our guests are Councillor Paul Foster, Leader of the Council, Councillor Matthew Tomlinson, the Cabinet Member for Finance, Property and Assets, James Thompson, the Section 151 Officer, and a welcome to Vicky Willett, who is our new Shared Services Lead for Transformation and Partnerships. Apologies for absence. First of all, item 1, I've got apologies from Councillor Karen Walton, Councillor Will Adams and Councillor Colin Sharples. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations? If not, if we can then move on to item 3. Item 3 and 4, minutes of the previous Scrutiny Budget and Performance Panel meeting. Colin, would you be able to move those?
I will move those.
Thank you. I'll second those if we can accept those then. Item 5 is the budget out term for 2019-2020. And if I could invite Councillor Tomlinson and James Thompson to present the report.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So this is the out turn for the last financial year. There is a lot of information here to digest. Some of it is quite technical, if you'll forgive me, which means I may well fall back on James at certain times, but I will try and take you through it as best I can. I hope members will agree this is a pleasing set of final figures. We were budgeted to have a surplus, but actually we're coming in significantly higher than that at a surplus. Indeed, it's going to allow us to put some money to one side to cover us for any eventualities post COVID. You'll see the recommendations on page 11 of the report. And so what we're intending to do with the surplus is basically to put it into reserves this year. And the by far the largest chunk is to go in the business rates retention reserve. Quite how business rate payments and collections will be affected by COVID-19 is just enormously difficult to predict. We do already have what I think is a relatively healthy reserve, because there's always been some uncertainties about business rates now for a number of years, whether it's about the pooling or 75% or 50%. And the previous administration did put money to one side to cover for those eventualities. And we've decided, or I'm hoping that Cabinet will agree, that we've decided on Wednesday that the vast majority of this year's surplus should go to cover us into that reserve. There are some highlights we could take you through if we go through it page by page. Why have we got such a significant extra surplus this time? Well, if you look at the top of page 12, there's a little table there that tells you surplus business rates above and beyond what we budgeted of £760,000. And the garden waste scheme brought in £162,000 more than was budgeted for. Now, obviously, that particular budget line, there won't be a surplus next year because, of course, in line with manifesto promises, we reduced the cost of the garden waste collection. So I would expect to see that that surplus disappear. Pleasingly, the sign-ups for this year are roughly in line with last year. So we should be on budget, but we won't see that surplus again. There are some other increased costs. We wrote off all our rents for all our tenants in March because of the COVID pandemic breaking, and you'll see there that cost us £140,000, and we should expect to see that feed through into Q1's report as well, because we did exactly the same in April and May. There are some costs associated with the project to build to consider building a leisure centre at West Paddock. All of the original costs for that went into capital because it was to fund a capital project. But as it now looks unlikely we're going to be building a leisure centre there, certainly in the near future, some of those costs we've had to put to revenue. And the reasoning for that is explained further in the report. If we go on to page 13, you'll see the summary there, breaking down where we've actually spent money as against the budget. And I guess like most budgets, if you go on to table 2 as well, there are a variety of what I think are pleasingly small variances in the main. It's a few thousand here, a few thousand there. It's not like the budget that was set the previous year has been missed by a long way. And then there's an explanation for some of the staffing cost variations on page 16. And then if you go on to page 20, sorry, this is a whistle-stop tour, but we will be prepared to accept questions, of course. You'll see the differences in income there, and you'll see again the biggest one there is the garden waste income as a variance. There's some information about the staffing vacancies. You'll recall when I've been to Scrutiny during the year, I've asked for and promised a breakdown of where we've got vacancies, how long they've been vacant for, and what we intend to do about filling those vacancies. And then Appendix B is the capital programme. And again, I think really quite pleasing, the amount of stuff that we did manage to deliver on the capital programme. So with that, I don't want to talk too much further. I don't know if James wants to add anything that I've missed off that he thinks is important, but I'm sure there'll be some questions.
James, is there anything you wish to add to that?
No, I think that's covered the main parts of the report. Thank you. Okay,
thank you. Well, we do have some questions, and if I could start by taking you to page 11, paragraph 5. You've mentioned that there was an overall budget surplus of 1.4 million. What can be learned here with regard to accurate budgeting and forecasts in future financial years?
Yeah, I think obviously once you set a budget, if that's based at delivering your corporate priorities, you've got a judgment to make about how much money you've spent and how many of those corporate priorities you have actually delivered. I think I said in my preamble that I think the variances, apart from 2 or 3 very hefty variances, are relatively small. If you look through certainly the staffing variances, it's variance of 10,000 here, 12,000 there, that tend to balance themselves out. I don't know if James can help. What can we learn about budgeting for business rate income? Because it always seems to be more of an art than a science. But clearly that we're 900,000 out, let's be honest, 900,000 out on where we thought we would be in the positive, but 700,000 of it is more business rates coming in than we thought would come in. and we never know what that figure is until the money actually arrives. The Section 31 grant. I'm looking at James to see if he's nodding. Just nod, James. Yeah. It's always until the money arrives, you're never quite sure exactly how much that's going to be, and obviously it's significantly more than we thought. What else could we learn from this, James?
If business grants specifically, obviously it's an unusual year, 1920, because we're part of the pilot. So South Ribble benefits most from being in the pilot and being in the pool as well. So part of that, well, you can see from table 4 that about 300,000 of the underspend was because this pilot was obviously cancelled by the government for 2021 onwards, and we've brought back in some of the funds that South Ribble put into the pilot for things like the developing the Lancashire Wide Fund. So of that, there was going to be 400,000 committed for the Greater Lancashire Plan. I believe that's been put on hold as a result of this pilot now being cancelled by government. So not all of that 700,000 is a result of not understanding budgeting it or correctly. But the other thing to note with the business rates is the Section 31 grants received in year rather than any growth, which is benefited the year after. So there's always a timing mismatch as well. So a lot, for example, of new businesses might have come in to South Ribble over 2019-20. Many of them entitled to things like small business rate relief. Well, as a result of that, the government will compensate the council for that. And so we will get that benefit in year. But in terms of the budget, yes, I agree that we shouldn't see huge underspend as something good. We should be looking to budget as closely as we can, and not just in the following year, but over the 3 years to make sure that we do get the maximum benefit to residents, as like you said, as part of the refresh of the corporate plan. Someone ringing me?
Okay, thank you. Page 12, paragraph 13, you've made reference to a council tax increase of 1.99%. Looking at the budget surplus achieved at year end, was there really a need to raise council tax?
Well, again, I come back to the point that I made about budgeting. It is a budget. When you set a budget, this is what you think you need. I don't think anybody could have foreseen that 700,000 landing. So at the time we set the budget, we thought that was appropriate. And of course, this big variance, this is for 1 year only. We won't get a £700,000 surplus on business rates next year. And so there's a great danger if you forego a council tax increase 1 year because you think you've got one big pot of money coming in. You have to remember you'll be losing that council tax increase for every year forever. And so that's money that you will lose time and time again. So was it appropriate at the time? I think it was. Have we got more money in than we thought? Yes, we have. But there's the great risk now, of course, the great uncertainties about how the fallout from COVID will affect our businesses. At least now we've got a cushion there should the worst come to the worst, and some people are talking about a 9 to 14% contraction in business. Now, if that happens, that will be a real blow in our business rate collection. I think our business rate income in total was about 6 million this year. So it doesn't take many years of a contraction of that sort to start illustrating to you why we need that cushion that we've now got.
Okay. Councillor Coulton, you have a question on the Chief Executive staffing budget.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On page 14, table 2, it states that the Chief Executive staffing budget shows a £19,000 overspend. Do we know the reason for that?
Well, I think,
overspend, and could it not have been forecast to give a more realistic budget?
Okay. You'll forgive me if I keep going off the screen, because if I open modern.gov on this iPad, my face gets blanked out. So you'll just see. But, I know. And why would you want to blank this face out? No, I think you'll see there were some extra costs, of course, because we had to pay our portion of the shared interim chief exec. but we also made savings from not having the 2 assistant chief execs. So, of course, when the budget's set, no one was to know what was going to happen with the former chief exec, or indeed the 2 former deputy chief execs. But that is the explanation for it. Could it have been budgeted better? Well, I think, you know, events, dear boy, events, no one could have foreseen that happening. And that's the cost. That's what it's cost us.
Okay. You okay with that, Colin?
Just about.
Right. I'll take the just about as a yes for now. Page 14, table 2, you've already referred to the green waste income of 162,000. Was this generated because there was a far greater uptake than we expected? And if there is a further greater uptake, is that scope for a reduction in further years?
Well, the first answer is yes. So we were, if you like, in the second tranche of people who introduced charges for garden waste. There were several councils who introduced it earlier, and all the evidence from those were that you got people signed up in year 1, and then you got a fall off in year 2. We didn't get a fall off, actually. We got an increase, which explains why we got more money in than we thought we would get. This year, it's been, if I'm going to be honest, it's been a bit of a struggle to get people to sign up. Maybe, who knows, there was a lot of other things going on at about the time when you would normally be expecting people to sign up. And at the time, we did agree to give people, because don't forget, the household waste recycling centre was closed for the first 2 months when people would have signed up to a new scheme for the brown bin. So we gave people 2 months grace and said, even if people hadn't signed up, if they put the brown bin out, we would collect it. And people have been a lot slower this year to sign up. We did an awful lot of social media publicity towards the end of the 2 months, and that nudged a few people who signed up. And then at the beginning of June, we stopped collecting brown bins without the sticker, and that encouraged a few other people to sign up as well. And we are now roughly where we were last year. So I don't think we'll get an increase on what we got last year. We're roughly at where we were, and with the new cheaper cost, we should get in what we budgeted for this year. So yes to your first question, probably no to your second question, Chair.
Right. Okay. Councillor Coulton.
On page 14, table 2, it measures leisure campus project abortive costs. Can you explain what these costs are?
I can. So
why were I'm not finished yet.
No, go on. Yeah.
Why were they aborted, and what have we learned?
Okay, so you'll recall that in the last budget of the previous administration, there was a plan, a long-term plan, to spend money on a leisure centre next door, and a lot of preparatory work was commissioned in the last 3 or 4 months of the previous administration. So that work was ordered, commissioned by the previous chief exec in the previous administration, and some of it took place after the budget was set for last year. Obviously, you'll know that further investigations took place after the change of administration, and the actual cost of building the leisure centre was coming up at significantly more than we originally thought. Now, I don't intend to have a big debate here and about why that is, but that is the fact. And frankly, there's a great doubt now that scheme that was originally envisaged on West Paddock is affordable. Now, those costs that had been already ordered, already commissioned by the previous chief exec and the previous administration had to be paid for, and they had been paid for, but the intention was they would be judged as capital costs because they were part of a long-term capital project that would realise an asset for the council. Now that that doesn't look like it's going to happen, certainly not in the short term anyway, not all of those costs can be legitimately kept on the capital budget. They just can't, because when are we going to see an asset? No one knows at the moment. Some of the costs of the work that was commissioned will still be able to be used if we do anything on that site. So groundworks, for instance, surveying, all of that. So for instance, should we decide to build an extra care facility there, some of the work that's been done will still be able to be put towards that project. But some of the work, designs for the leisure centre, all that kind of thing, we cannot hold that in the capital budget anymore. And so that needs to be paid for this year as a revenue cost. It's all very unfortunate. It's not something that we organised. It's not something we commissioned. It's not something we budgeted for. But someone has to pay for it. And the council has to pay for it because the work has been done. Thankfully, we've got the money because we're showing a surplus this year to pay for it in the revenue budget. And it needs to be accounted for. And there it is.
But it says aborted costs.
Yeah.
But
yeah, they're not
some of the work that we're done. If we do, I presume we are going to build a new leisure centre sometime.
Yeah.
So surely will the work that's already been done, not when we do build a leisure centre, gives a flying start to that leisure centre.
It's really important. This is not money that's just been spent and we'll never see any benefit for. It's an accounting procedure that needs to be done as to how we actually pay for it. If it was for, if we could see the asset was still on track and we were going to deliver it, we would have paid for it out of the capital budget. So it would be shown in the capital, in the appendix B, I think it is, which shows our capital expenditure for the year. But because we can't honestly say there's the leisure centre that we're going to build and this is the timetable for it, the accountancy regulations won't allow us to do that. So the work that's been done and paid for may still well be used and it may still well be of benefit to this council. It's just how we pay for it has to be different. I guess the terminology, abortive costs, does make it sound like there's money being thrown away that's never going to be of benefit. And I hope that's, I hope we can reassure people that that's not necessarily the case. But
so would it not be good?
So
would it not be a good idea to reword that to pay for work already carried out on this project?
I'm fairly relaxed about it actually. It is what it is. It's work that's been done, and it has to be paid for. So I think we just get on with it and get it done. But it's being paid for, so it's just how it's accounted for in the budget.
Right. I think Paul put his hand up.
Oh yes, right, Councillor Foster.
It's just, thanks, Chair. It's just to add a bit of clarity to what Matthew's been saying, is that those costs, Colin, that you're seeing there, there's a substantially larger sum of money being spent on the leisure facility already. It is just a proportion that the 230k that Matt's on about that's been written off, because the facility will not be going on West Paddock, and the facility that money was spent on is unaffordable. There's no option, but the statutory officers have stated it must be written off. That doesn't mean that the base designs, for example, and the cost for the base designs won't be apportioned to the new facility when it comes on board. And I can't remember the exact figure, Matt, what's been spent on the leisure facility to date, but it's substantially more than £230,000.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact figure, perhaps James will, but I thought it was around 600.
Right.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have another question, Colin?
I do, regarding trade waste income. That's table 2 again. Do we have any idea why we didn't make as much money on trade waste as we'd anticipated?
I'm going to be really honest with you, Councillor Coulton, and say I don't know. It is a competitive market because you've got people like Biffa and lots of. It's not like the household waste where you get it collected by South Ribble or it's not collected. We are involved in a competitive market out there, and it's a tough market. It's a tough market. But if there are any specific reasons, I'm afraid I'm not. I don't have that information to hand, and perhaps we can just promise to let you know what the people from the service will let you know.
You'll advertise or whatever.
Yeah, and we're out there, you know, and you'll see our skips are out there, and lots of businesses use us, but there's plenty of other people you can use, and as I say, it's a competitive marketplace that you have to be involved in.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah. Okay, no. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I can take you to page 15, where you've got an increase in provision for bad debt. What's the rationale for increasing the provision? And is it anticipating economic issues with regards to the impact of the pandemic?
I'm going to hand you over to James.
Yes, that's exactly it, Chair. We need to be prudent with our assumptions with regards to how much debt we'll recover, and especially due to the pandemic, we need to take a prudent approach on that. It's usually based on a formula, 10% put aside if it's the debt's 30 days old, increasing as the age of the debt increases. As a result of the pandemic, we have experienced an increase in debt. Now, some of this will just be because we're not enforcing trying to recover that debt, but we need to be prudent and say, well, this is the information we had at the end of March, April time, and this is the provision we're going to provide. So I don't actually have the figure for what the total provision is, but it's a fairly modest increase given the pandemic, really. So at the moment, we're not looking like we had to increase the provision by a huge amount, which is good news.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coulton.
Page 16, staffing costs. Based on the main variations on table 3, how confident are you that we have the capacity and correct staffing levels in place to deliver our services, etc.?
Thank you. Yeah, I am confident. Obviously, we're doing a refresh of the corporate strategy as well. But I know this is something that the interim chief exec's been looking at ever since he arrived here, about the capacity we've got in the building, and we have made some changes. One of the reasons I've asked that the staff vacancy report comes to scrutiny with every quarterly report is that all members can be on top of what vacancies we're carrying, why we're carrying vacancies, what is it we're doing about them. And you'll see many of the vacancies, if you look at the table that itemises it, many of the vacancies we've got are fairly short term. These are vacancies that were people who left at Christmas or times like that. And in other examples, there are vacancies that we've been carrying, but we're looking at shared services and the restructure. So it's not the case, I don't think, I'm confident it's not the case, that we are holding vacancies that really need to be filled in order to save money or balance the books. The vacancies that are there, as I said, in the main, are very short term, and where they're not short term, we've got plans to do something about it.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yourself again, Colin.
On page 17, under the heading Customer and Digital, it says that there are 3 vacancies in the Gateway, which I'd have thought is a fairly small department. Are these vacancies going to be filled, and what impact are they having on Gateway, which is like an out-facing section of the council, and it's the first thing that people see when they come into the council building?
I'm just having a look, Councillor Coulton, at Appendix A, which itemises our vacancies in Gateway, and you'll see that they're all very relatively recent vacancies. And as far as I'm concerned, the intention is to fill them. We're certainly not looking to save money or shed jobs in Gateway.
No.
But Appendix A will show you that they are fairly relatively recent vacancies. You'll always, we always have a turnover of staff. People leave all the time, and there's always a lag. So when somebody leaves, if they give you a month's notice, it can take 3-4 months to fill that vacancy by the time you've advertised and interviewed. And so there are always, we do always have vacancies. What's important is we have a plan to fill them, and we know how long we've had the vacancy, how that vacancy is being managed, and whether or not we plan to fill them. And all 3 of those, in fact, one of those vacancies I think came about in February. They left in February, and we haven't filled it yet. But that's the kind of thing, and that's the exact reason I asked for that report to be added to the reports that come to Scrutiny, so you can see.
But 3 is quite a lot, isn't it?
I really don't know. 3 people have left relatively recently.
Is there some there's no underlying reason of dissatisfaction why people have left, is there?
Certainly nothing that I'm aware of. We do exit interviews, and if there is an underlying reason, then that ought to be shown up in exit interviews. But and certainly I'm not aware of anything. James has put his hand up. Perhaps he's got something more concrete to add than me.
No, just to mention that, well, first of all, it is quite a large team, about 21 FTEs in that team, so it is quite a large team. And there is a lot of turnover. Well, there is quite a lot of turnover within the team, but that's because they either move on elsewhere and within the council or 2 other councils as well. It can be quite a starting point to gain that experience and then move on up. So, and I'm just reiterating Councillor Tomlinson's point that there's no policy to keep those vacant to save money at all. It's just the way that team operates, really.
So we're now likely to see it back to full strength. When you say it's a fairly small percentage, it still must be, if there's 21, 3 is a 7th, which is about 15%.
Yeah,
which is quite a high percentage, I would have thought.
Councillor, it's not a 7th all the time. It just happened to be a 7th on the 31st of March. When the books were closed, so we could fill those positions, and then in another couple of months 1 person leaves, and then we fill that, and then 2. But we had 3 people left in fairly short. I think 2 were just before Christmas and 1 was just after. But it is just a snapshot, and let me reassure you, Councillor Coulton, it's not our policy to keep 3 vacancies in a team of 21 as a matter of course. That just happened to be.
I wasn't suggesting that it was.
No, I know.
It must. Is it having some detrimental effect on what, as I said, is the front line of the council, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's set at 21 members of staff because we think that's what we need. So if for a period of time we're down to 18 members of staff, we're bound to ask people to do a little bit more than they usually do, and we'd want it to be 21.
Right, can I just bring Vicky in because she's sitting patiently with a hand raised.
Hi, good evening. No, I was just going to say, just to reassure members that it's 21 full-time equivalents, so there's a lot more staff, and some of them, it's a lot of part-time contracts as well. So actually it is quite, we've got sufficient cover, and there's been no impact on performance. Performance is really strong in Gateway at the moment, which is really positive. And we are in the process of recruiting. I'm aware of that. So I think I can reassure members that we are addressing those vacancies.
Could when you mention recruiting, so when will we be up to strength?
We're going through that process now. So now that we're able to, we've had a bit of downtime on recruitment due to some of the restrictions that have been in place, and the nature of the role means that in some cases we need to do a bit more of an intensive kind of process for Gateway officers. We want to know that they can interact face to face and things like that. So we've been able to get back on with that again now, and I would think over the coming weeks we'll be building back up again. I can check on the exact status and give that information to members.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can now take you to page 18, and you did indicate that business rate was more an art than a science, but given that we've had the economic situation with COVID, what is the impact of that likely to be in terms of future years' income?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not even going to try and answer that because who knows. But we do now have a substantial reserve, business rates reserve, and even if it's something between 9 and 14% contraction in business, and we get a similar knock-on figure to our business rates collection, the reserve that we've now got should see us through. Dare I say, to the end of South Ribble? I do not know, but we are. The previous administration were prudent with all the uncertainties there were about business rate collection, and we've continued that. I would actually go, and I've raised this, I would actually go the other way and think we maybe need to see how this year goes and have a conversation about how much do we really need to have in that reserve, and could we in fact use some of that money to improve the infrastructure of the borough rather than just be sat there waiting for a rainy day. But for this year, with all the unknowns that we've got, as I said, another 600,000 to bolster that reserve is, I think, very, very prudent. Okay,
and in a similar theme of COVID, page 25, we've got the credit union. Due to the future economic uncertainty, might this reserve have to be increased?
Well, as I understand it, and because it's Councillor Bilinski-Gelder's portfolio, but as I understand it, the money that we've set aside for the credit union is to pump prime the startup. So it's not, if there's more demand for the credit union, we'll have to put more money in. The money that we've laid aside is to help the credit union establish itself. And I think it was for over a 3-year period. And then this council's contribution to the credit union would end. Once it's established, it's not envisaged that this is something that we carry on putting money towards, because it becomes a self-sustaining thing. So the short answer is no, Councillor. That money's there for a particular reason. We thought that there was a need for a credit union before the pandemic came. Doubly sure that we will need one now. But the money that we've set aside for that is just to help the credit union get itself an established base somewhere in the borough.
Okay, and finally on this item, Councillor Coulton.
Thank you, Chair. We've asked for this information a goodly number of times on the capital programme. We've asked for greater information on the capital items, when I used to be involved in capital projects, I used to do bar graphs with timings and, went into a great deal of detail. So can we have, more information on the capital projects? timings, etc. And
I think you can have whatever you like, as far as I'm concerned, Councillor Coulton. I think, you know, Councillor Howard has asked for the full budget book, and he's getting it. You know, you can. There's nothing that you can't have. It's just you have to tell us exactly how you'd like to see it. But if you want you to Darren, you know, about what information you would like, at the risk of boring people to death, we're committed to be open and transparent on everything. And if there's information you want, then information you shall get. But you just need to be clear about what you want to do with it, and be clear that it's going to add some benefit to the work that Scrutiny do. But yeah, absolutely.
Well, to my mind, if we get timings in a bit of detail for capital projects, we can hold whoever to account on those timings. That's just one example.
If you and Councillor Howard want to speak to Darren about what you'd like to see in future Scrutiny reports, then I'm happy for you to have whatever we can give you.
Right, very good.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if James has just fainted, but he seems okay. Could I invite members not on the panel if they have any questions? Councillors Smith and Smith.
No, I have no questions at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Phil?
No questions from me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In which case, thank you to Councillor Tomlinson and to James for their input. And if we now move on to supplementary item 6, the corporate strategy refresh, and I will invite Councillor Foster along with Vicky Willett to present that to us.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Colin. Briefly, you'll notice a very brief update report for you both, just to update you that the corporate plan is being refreshed as we speak and will be presented to Council at the end of September. Clearly, we're only at the end of the first year of the new administration, and we fully refreshed, if you remember last year, the corporate plan back, which was adopted by Council in September. However, since then, clearly we've been in the midst and still in the midst of a global COVID-19 pandemic that's having an awful impact on our residents. And so we thought it absolutely prudent that we had a look at the corporate priority and look to make any amendments as we saw fit that change the vision, priorities or long-term outcomes for our residents given COVID. So the work is in action as we speak. Vicky and the team are in the process of producing the detail. The vision is there for you on page 4 of the supplementary agenda, where we have added in the word accountable to the vision, which we think is critically important given the corporate governance challenges that the authority has had. You'll then notice that the priorities are now exemplary council, thriving communities, a fair local economy that works for everyone, good homes, green spaces and well places. We've then gone on to detail for you just some of the long-term outcomes that we're looking to develop within these key priorities. And then the final point I'd make is that we are trying desperately to make it more user-friendly. These are never easy. Corporate priorities and corporate plans are never easy to digest, and they need to be easier to digest so that people understand them and make it clear what our priorities as administration are. So we are making a visual version of the strategy, and we are looking to make it much more user friendly when we present it to Council at the end of September. I think it's clear that COVID has had a huge, as I mentioned earlier, detrimental impact on our community. We're now looking at a spike in deaths. We're looking at a potential spike in unemployment, huge indebtedness, and we have to do something about it. And so therefore we're looking across the board now to see and make sure that our corporate priorities and our corporate plan are fit for purpose. And we don't apologise, Chair, for making these changes within a year of the new corporate plan being issued, because nobody could have envisaged that the COVID-19 pandemic would hit us, and I think it's prudent of us to do is what we're doing. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions. I know you haven't got the detail of the revised corporate plan in front of you because the officers are still working on it. It's work in progress, but Vicky and I are happy to take any questions you may have, Chair.
Okay, Vicky, would you like to add to that at all, or has that covered it?
That's covered it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I was going to say I'll take the nod as that's covered it. Councillor Coulton, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. What evidence is being used, and what is the rationale for the refreshing the corporate strategy now that with the impact of the COVID-19 on the organisation is still largely unknown?
It is unknown, Colin, I accept that, but we do know what we do know as well, if that makes sense. So we know that there's been huge impacts on the health of the borough. We know there's going to be huge impacts on unemployment. There's going to be a huge demand for social services. There's going to be a huge demand for debt advice. There's still a huge demand, and we've got the evidence for the use of the community hubs and the food banks. So we're keeping a close eye on the national picture, because the national picture is exactly what's happening within South Ribble. We've got all the detail and the data from the community hubs, Colin, as well, that you're aware of, that we're still actively working in every area of our community as we speak. And so it is very much work in progress. And you know what, when we present the new corporate plan in September, I've got no doubts that we'll have to continue to develop the corporate plan and the priorities, because it is ever changing. But where I want us to be is at the point where we can adapt quickly, and we can make the changes when we need to make the changes. Vicky, anything further to add to that?
Right, thank you.
No, I think that's everything. We did provide a full evidence base to members as part of the development process, which has been used as part of kind of gathering the feedback that we needed to inform the priorities.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell us what the key differences from the corporate plan agreed early in the year are?
I think for me, Chair, it's more about, and again, I'm talking about a document that hasn't been finalised or published yet, but it's more about grasping the community hub. Those community hubs that we developed very, very quickly back in March and April have made a huge difference to the local authority in our engagement with our communities, David, and we need to ensure that the corporate priorities and the work that we look to develop is structured in a way that we can use those community hubs better. And we, you know, the other big issues we've got is we've got to make sure that there is availability of those key services that our residents will need moving forward. So you'll be looking at more about the, you know, citizens advice, about debt advice, about housing. You know, that we've just developed, grasped all the challenges that we face, and we're challenging our corporate planning to ensure that we are in a position where we can deliver for the local residents.
Okay, thank you. And can I take you to page 4, paragraph 7? What does the word exemplary mean? Is this plain English, and is it user friendly?
It means excellent, Chair, and it's just a different way of saying excellent. It's a personal preference, Chair. I think an excellent council, I don't know what people make of an excellent council. Exemplary means you're the best. We want to be the best. Right,
okay. Councillor Coulton.
Thank you, Chair. Will the budget have to be changed when you've completed this refreshing corporate strategy?
Colin, we're not planning to make any in-year budget changes, no, but the budget planning process for next year has already commenced, because all the information feedback that Matthew's getting is that the main impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will hit next year's budget, not necessarily this year's budget. So no in-year budget changes to be made. However, we are closely looking at next year and the year beyond that.
Yeah, okay, right, thank you.
Thank you. What will be the impact of the refreshed corporate strategy on the quarterly performance reports presented to the scrutiny panel and cabinet?
I'm going to let Vicky come in a second, but one thing I would hope is that the monitoring is much easier for the scrutiny committee to A, understand, and B, get value from, because I find corporate performance reports challenging at times at best for us to actually fully understand what they're trying to say and how they align with the corporate priorities, but most importantly for me, how they align with the budget as well. So that is, it mentions in the report, doesn't it, Chair, that that's something Vicky and the team are looking at. And Vicky, could I ask you to jump straight in there, if you may?
Yeah, so in terms of the performance report that you get, I think the aim is to, as Councillor Foster says, to streamline that and to clearly demonstrate how performance and delivery is supporting the corporate priorities and the corporate strategy, and that's really about focusing on outcomes as well. So actually, what is the council, what is the work that the council's doing, and what are we delivering? How is that having an impact, and how is that benefiting our residents? So it's really about how we make that clear connection from what we're reporting in terms of performance through to the corporate strategy and the outcomes that we want to achieve. So I think it should be streamlining the whole process, and we would expect to see a more focused programme of activity around this as well.
Okay, thank you. And finally, what are the next steps for developing the refresh further, and what is the role of members and specifically scrutiny?
Well, we're hoping to get the detailed document finished as quickly as we can. It's been challenging for Vicky and the team because this is fast moving. I would envisage, Chair, with your consent, that when the document is complete, that we bring it back to your panel prior to council.
Okay.
Vicky, anything to add?
The next stage is, as we said, to develop out the programme of activity that will support the strategy and the performance measures as well, to make sure that we can track performance against the strategic objectives. So, and yeah, we'll be drawing that together over the coming weeks. We're actually in the process of doing that now, and I would agree. I hope we can bring it back through this panel for further feedback and comments.
Thank you, because I'm not one for visions and journeys and management.
Do you not like well placed? Do you not like well placed, Chair?
So delivery is I think what we're looking for. So thank you to Councillor Foster. Thank you to Vicky. Are there any members not on the panel who would like to ask any questions? If we have a social bubble up at the top of my screen there, which is not a term I ever thought I'd use in a meeting. Nothing. No.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come in there?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not surprised that the corporate plan is being revisited. I think every council, every business in this country is reevaluating how it's going to operate over the next 12 months or maybe even longer. So I can anticipate maybe a few changes there. What I would suggest is that if we could take 50 pages out of it, it really would make it easier reading, a lot easier to understand, and easier to follow in the future. So that would be a good thing, without cutting down on the projects and all the other things that will be coming forward. I think it was certainly, if it was shorter by 50 pages, that would help an awful lot. Thank you, Chair.
I think it was only 51 pages in the first place, Phil. So.
I don't think it was, with all those nice coloured pictures. There was about 50 pages of coloured pictures that you decided to introduce at the last minute, I think, if I remember rightly. Thank you, Chair.
Could I just say, it does perhaps depend on what size type you use as well. Right, so thank you everybody for your attendance. Before I finish, Darren, do we have any recommendations on both of those items on the agenda?
Thank you, Chair. Turning to the report on the outturn, some of the points that I picked up during the conversation, which I'd be grateful for any feedback from the panel, are that the panel thanks the Cabinet member and Section 151 officer for their detailed report and the answers to the questions from the panel. Recommendation 2, the panel requests further information on the reduction in trade waste income. Recommendation 3, the panel welcomes the inclusion of staffing vacancies in the report and the improvement to vacancy rates over the last 12 months. Recommendation 4, the panel welcomes the reassurance about staffing in Gateway and asks for an update on staffing vacancies and recruitment in the Gateway team. And finally, more in-depth narrative on the capital projects be provided in future reports. With regards to the second item, the refreshed corporate strategy, the panel thanks the leader and service lead for the report and attending the meeting. The panel welcomes the refresh of the corporate strategy, and the panel looks forward to considering the draft strategy and performance measures prior to approval by council.
Thank you. Can we agree those, Colin? So was that a yes?
Yes.
Right, thank you. In which case, those are our recommendations approved by the panel. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. And with that, I will now close the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.